I, 24 female, have a brother, 32. He's got 5 kids. His eldest is Rachel, female teen. My grandmother passed when I was 16. She had always promised him she would leave her home behind for him if she passed on. That is, until the year before she passed. He cut contact with her because she didn't help him with money, so she left it to me. My brother wasn't pleased to find out that he didn't get the house. When he found out that the house was left to me, he was still hung up on the idea that it should have been his. I came out as bi when I was a teen, and my family stopped talking to me. My mother disowned me, and I had no choice but to move in with an uncle that I barely knew. I married my wife 3 years ago. I didn't contact any family, but 2 years ago, my brother's daughter, Rachel, reached out to me that year. She was asking for a place to stay and said she came out as gay and got disowned by my brother. I drove 2 hours to pick her up, and she didn't have anything with her, not even a hair tie. When I brought her home, I shared some of my things with her, and the next day I made sure to go buy the things she'd need. I enrolled her into an online school because we live far from any schools, and I got her a psychologist. About a year later, my brother contacted me. He lost his job and asked me for a place to stay. I told him he could come stay with us. I tried making space for them by clearing out 3 rooms, one for my brother, the rest for the children to share. He and his other children often cornered Rachel. They only got worse with each second they stayed with me. His children were loud, and they constantly were arguing. They kept breaking things. They would constantly terrorize my dog, etc. This all continued for 6 months. My wife and I went on a trip for a week. She had a business trip, and her boss said I could come. About 2 days after we arrived at the resort, Rachel called us crying. She told us we needed to go home ASAP. We did. We returned to my brother having painted his and his children's rooms, saying that they should get to make themselves feel at home. Rachel told them during an argument that my wife and I were more of a family to her than they were, which resulted in them withholding her PS from her, one of the twins stealing her makeup, and blocking her from any source of entertainment. I threw my brother and his children out when I saw what was happening. I refused to let them back in. My brother claimed that the house was supposed to be his. It's been 2 months since, and I've not stopped getting contacted by relatives telling me that he's my brother and he needs help, telling me that I stole his child from him, that I have enough money to rent him a place for free to stay while he gets back on his feet, and I've even received a threat or 2. My friends say my family isn't entirely wrong, and I should try to help where I can, that his children aren't even in school anymore, and that I'm setting his children up for failure. I honestly do feel guilty, like I could help with food or schooling at least. It isn't his children's fault that they were raised in such an environment, but overall I'm just overwhelmed and don't know what to do. So am I the idiot? You are the idiot. Why in the ever-living heck did you think it was a good idea to allow the family that disowned Rachel to move in with you all while Rachel was also living with you? I cannot believe for a second that she was ever okay with that and didn't tell you about it. Also, you threw them out only when it was actually beginning to inconvenience you and your wife personally. Really makes me wonder how much you were thinking about her welfare this whole time. Bingo. Who does that? OP, you rescued her from them, only to turn around and bring her abuser to her. None of this makes any sense. So you also knew he was a mooch off of your grandmother and still thought he'd be different with you? I'm sorry, but you allowed this all to happen and absolutely knew better. Good luck repairing Rachel's trust, Auntie. This is OP's brother and Rachel's father. I'm sure they were optimistic and didn't realize it would be terrible, and OP kicked the family out the second Rachel asked. This person took in their kid cousin, took care of her, and kept her safe. So it's completely unfair of you to imply that OP doesn't care about her. Not the idiot, OP. You aren't putting them on the street. Their behavior was incompatible with staying in your house. If they restrained themselves in any way, they would be welcome in your home. Also, who decides to paint someone else's house without them knowing? Who wastes time and money painting a temporary place? That's weird and kind of implies that they weren't planning on leaving anytime soon. Just because you are all blood family does not force you to keep him in your house. I'm sure those family members reaching out to you have the space for his children if they're that concerned. Update. Am I the idiot for putting my brother and his children on the street? I didn't think it was a good idea. When my brother reached out to me, I consulted Rachel first and foremost. I asked Rachel whether or not she wanted me to let him stay for a while or move out. She said she wanted to try and fix things with her father. Of course, I asked her whether or not she was sure. I reminded her that they'd be out when she said she wanted them out. Of course, I do agree with you all. I should have ignored him and pretended he didn't reach out. Unfortunately, Rachel suffered, and there isn't much I can do about that now, other than being there for her. Rachel deserves all the support she can get. Thank you for the advice. I, female 25, married my husband 25 in August. We kept it small and simple and didn't want too many guests due to the budget, so we only invited close family members and friends. My older sister, Dawn, 38, has 10 children. My parents and the rest of my family aren't religious, but Dawn and her husband are very hardcore Christians and believe that having many children is God's will. Inviting all of my nieces and nephews would be quite expensive. My wedding isn't child-free, but my husband and I decided it would be fairest if we only invited Dawn's 3 eldest kids. I talked to Dawn about it and explained our reasoning, but she was offended and said I was picking favorites. I told her I was sorry, but 10 kids was a considerable cost on our wedding budget and that we tried to be as fair as possible. Dawn accused me of being a bridezilla and thinking I was too good for her and her family. So I told Dawn, if she doesn't like it, she doesn't have to come, but that she's my sister and I really want her at the wedding. Dawn, her husband, and 3 eldest kids did come to the wedding, but with the other family members bringing small children, everyone was asking her why not all of their kids were there. After the wedding, Dawn has been very off around me. She told me she understands how I feel about her babies and said that I'm a bad sister and a terrible aunt and has accused me of not respecting her religion and lifestyle. My parents and other siblings have been making comments like, "Don't get too excited for XYZ. OP said only 3 people can come because there are too many of us." The comments have been getting to me a bit, and I wonder if I was the idiot. Edit. My husband and I paid for the wedding ourselves. Not the idiot. That's a family of 12. If your sister's upset, she could have offered to contribute towards the cost. A consequence of having a load of kids is that people aren't going to want to cater to all of them at events because it is a high cost. And OP said the wedding was only about 40 people anyway. Adding a family of 12 to that is insane. That's a fourth of your guest list. And even if you found a decent venue where kids' meals are maybe $50 a plate, that's still $600 if you're going low budget. That's huge in your food cost. Geez, they have enough kids for a sports team. It's your wedding, but you also have to expect consequences for your actions. Your sister's reaction isn't completely unreasonable and should have been expected, as well as her behavior after the wedding. Not saying that it's right or wrong, but it should have been expected. In her eyes, you insulted her family and her faith. Gently, you are the idiot. You really should have set an age limit to avoid all this drama. It must have been so awkward for everyone to keep asking your sister, "Where are your other kids? Why did you only bring 3 of your kids?" You did single your sister out, and stuff like this will happen. My husband took me out to a birthday dinner, my birthday. While waiting for the food, I saw an old coworker and told my husband I wanted to speak to them for a moment. While talking, I kept looking back toward our table to see if our food was out and to check on my husband. No food that I could tell. I'm super nearsighted, and he seemed to be reading something on his phone. I wrapped up the convo, which may have been about 10 to 15 minutes, only to come back to him finishing his food. I asked if he was done already. Why didn't he let me know the food was out, etc.? And he started saying he had small portions, didn't think it was a big deal, didn't want to interrupt my conversation, etc. I asked why he didn't motion toward me or something. He said he didn't think it would be a big deal for him just to eat. Now, I understand what some may think about me walking over to speak to the former coworker. It was a quick 10 to 15 minute conversation and moving on. I even asked him if he minded if I went over and spoke to them for a few minutes because I hadn't seen them in quite some time. This wasn't a super fancy sit-down restaurant either. Our budget was tight, so we went to Cracker Barrel. I feel like he could have at least let me know the food was out or something. We've been married for 16 years, 2 teens, etc. Nothing like this has ever happened before. You are the idiot. Walking away for 15 minutes when you had your food ordered and were supposed to be celebrating with your husband is way ruder than your husband eating his food while it was hot and fresh. You should be apologetic, not indignant. I think it was longer than 15 minutes because how could OP start a convo, look a few times, see there was no food, end a convo, go back and hubby be done eating all in 15 minutes? LMAO. If someone did that to me while on a date and we weren't married, I would have left the money for my food and the tip on the table and politely left. Incredibly rude. Imagine the poor man sitting there for 10 to 15 minutes with food in front of him, gradually getting cold and gross, just waiting for his wife to remember. And I'm ridiculously nearsighted is the worst excuse ever for supposedly not realizing food had come. You weren't looking as much as you implied to miss the waiter at the table and your husband eating. You chose to prioritize that conversation over your birthday dinner with him. So here goes. A few years ago, my cousin's business closed, and he ran into some issues with the law, leaving him with a debt and a fine. Several family members pooled some money to lend him, and I lent him the bulk, $25,000 of that amount. His parents are unemployed, so they were unable to help much. He started a new business in secondhand car dealings and stuff, and I never thought much about it as I assumed he'd pay me back when he was in a more stable situation. One day, my younger brother informed me that my cousin had taken his family to Paris, 12 hours flight away, for a vacation. I saw it posted on my cousin's Facebook page, but I couldn't view it even though we're connected there, which means he probably hid it from me. I met up with my cousin after he was back and asked if there were any updates on the amount owed. He was surprised and asked about me suddenly bringing it up. I said I was aware that he had taken his family to Paris and asked why he didn't at least pay a certain portion back. My cousin got defensive and accused me of trying to control his life like he was bankrupt. I said that since he's in a much better financial situation, I would expect some repayments to start. I got my parents to inquire about their other siblings, my other uncles who had lent money to check on their status, and it turns out that my cousin had already repaid them about $7,000 US in total. I got angry and called my cousin to demand an explanation. He said that since I was the richest of them, I didn't need the money, and he would repay me last, along with some choice words about me hounding him, including, "Dude, just admit that you're broke and need the money." I said that if I didn't hear any plans for repayment within the next few days, I would explore other avenues. He dared me to sue him before hanging up. After a week of silence, I approached the debt collecting agency that I had used frequently for my own business. Lawsuits and whatnot were out of the question because lawyer fees would eat up half of that amount, and even if the court awards me that amount, the onus still falls to me in terms of collecting it. A week after that, my cousin calls me and curses me for embarrassing him at his workplace. It turns out the debt collector had headed down to his place of business and created a commotion and warned him that if he didn't want to discuss an installment plan, they would visit his house and his wife's workplace. I insisted that he speak to my debt collector about any issues regarding payment from now on. My relatives, including my parents, said that I was wrong to drag an outsider in and was too harsh, especially given that I was aware of how the agency operates from past experiences. Debt collectors are legal here, but many of their methods skirt the law in terms of legality. So I'm aware, but I honestly don't see any other avenues for someone who's deliberately being difficult. Not the idiot. You are owed a large sum of money. It seems like he's taking advantage of you. He took you and your money for granted. Then he started doing well, intentionally took a vacation behind your back, and gave you a bad attitude when you asked for your own money. So no amount of niceness was going to make him pay you anyway. I hope he pays you now that he knows he can't get away with the money or his behavior. Collect your money and move on. You don't get to decide that someone you owe money to is rich enough that you don't have to pay it back. He paid the smaller lenders so that they wouldn't join your side. Your cousin is a piece of work. Tough luck if he was embarrassed. He made you feel foolish for trying to help. He deserves to look foolish in front of his colleagues for being so slimy and ungrateful. Let this be a lesson to everyone again. Don't loan money to people if you can't afford to lose it. Banks give loans, and if they won't, it's for a reason. The debt collector seems like an idiot though, especially when dragging spouses into it. And unless there was a contract, it's unclear if this is even a debt in the legal sense. I feel like a demand letter from a lawyer would have been a reasonable start to this. OP is not the idiot, but this is a good lesson in lending money to family members. Only lend what you can afford to never see again. My husband and I had children before our marriage. He has 3 and I have 2, all kids over 30. We've known each other for 6 years. After my son left home, I rented the house and bought a smaller one with 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. One room is my office and the other a normal room. My husband and I have lived together in my house for 2 years, and we split the bills in half. But because my husband lost his old job and isn't earning as much in the new one, the bills are 3/4 for me. Our house is not a good place to receive visitors, especially for a long time, because they have to stay on a mattress in the living room. I don't let them sleep in the office because that's my place of work. Currently, almost 80% of my appointments are on video call. I'm a psychologist, so I need a reserved place. And there are a lot of patient documents, so no visits there. One of my husband's children, Logan, 32 male, is visiting our country 5 years abroad, and after staying at his mother's house, he came to see my husband. We invite him to stay for a few days. My husband is over the moon with Logan's presence, and although I say our house is not the best place for long visits, he insisted that Logan stays for another 2 weeks. The first week after that went fine, but Friday, my husband came to talk to me, suggesting that in these last days that Logan stays here, he stay in the office, puts things against the wall because he wants to accommodate his son better, and that it's sad to see him not having privacy even asleep. I remembered my warning about not being the best place for this, and that I'm not giving up my office because I work there. He started to say that a visitor's comfort should come first, and that I could use our room as a place of work, and that he could leave the room for that. It would only be a few days like this, 10 days. I was annoyed and said, look, if my job is important to keep those house bills paid, then work comes first. It's a few days, but for 8 days, I have patients all morning and afternoon. You knew the house wasn't the best place for this and insisted, so it's on you, but my office is essential to my work. He began to say that I was rubbing his face in it, and that I not only support the house, but him as my partner, and I should be committed to helping my stepson get comfort. He's mad at me for keeping my answer, and honestly, I've never noticed anything from Logan. I just really feel that it wouldn't be an option if the office were his place of work. Am I the idiot? The other 20%, I work in another city for a clinic with the patients. Not the idiot. So you pay 75% of the bills and are now expected to convert your office into a bedroom for one of his kids? Tell him to rent somewhere with his son if he wants to be around him that much. I don't know Logan's financial situation, but if he gets in that room, he may not leave it. Every point you laid out is valid. You need to work. You need privacy. You could literally be violating HIPAA if you allow him access to those files. Your husband knew the room situation before his son came to visit. Your work is not only done from home, but it's highly confidential. You need a separate private room to work out of. Even if your job wasn't what was keeping a roof over your head, a visitor's comfort is not more important than your literal job. If you don't have a lock on that door, I'd get one. I wouldn't be surprised if you come back to find he'd move things around anyway, with how he keeps going on about it. Allowing people into your office is just asking for a data breach. If he doesn't understand by now how important that space is to your work, he never will.